to review the stories we're going to talk about, the first is a climate story, and a new analysis shows that major sea level rise caused by the melting of Greenland ice is now inevitable. And these changes are baked into the system. If we put our new emissions to zero, they're still going to come. And I think this is an example of one of those tipping points that we've been hearing about, where you have changes that are not going to go back to their previous state anytime soon. The technology story is about a uh, new approach to super fast electric car charging. And this is a an approach that looks at the specifics of the different batteries in different cars and then modifies its charging approach to optimize for that battery. And it looks like it makes charging about 3 times faster just by doing a careful job. Then the environmental story, there's a new comprehensive analysis that was done that pegs the social cost of carbon in the US at $185 a ton. This is significantly higher than the present figure that the government uses when they calculate costs versus benefits. The current rate that they use is $51 a ton. So the way the government looks at the problem is understating the cost pretty drastically. And in space, one of the things the James Webb Telescope is doing is looking at the edge of the observable universe, looking back in time. And one of the things that they are seeing is galaxies, fully formed galaxies that show up about 300 million years after the Big Bang. And there are reports of individual stars that they're seeing that are substantially older. One of the things that this makes people wonder about is, was there something before the Big Bang? You know, because if there's stars that are too old, then how did they get there? And to me, it's exciting, actually, that the web, within a few weeks of it lighting up, is able to give us information that makes us evaluate fundamental theories of physics. So good job, Webb. Then in biology, scientists now have grown a synthetic embryo that has a brain and a beating heart and an egg sac, except it's not using eggs or sperm. So if they can complete this, then there's no role left for men. They don't need us anymore. Anyway, that's not what their purpose of the research is, though, they say. And in a human story, it turns out that 4 minutes of small talk can reveal key personality traits. So for me, this stuff that I hate when you meet new people and you're talking about the weather and your children and all of this stuff, actually is useful social behavior. And in doing it, you're learning about the person that you're talking about. and that learning is helpful in relating to people. So it turns out small talk is not small after all. And maybe I should have figured out how to do it 50 years ago and my life would be better. And then the last story is a story that is just for us. And it turns out our bodies age, but it turns out seniors have higher emotional well being. And they're now starting to understand why. So I think that's an interesting set of stories. We go from the beginnings of the universe to how to relate to people to how to take advantage of our senior years. So let me get started on the details. The first is about this major sea level rise. Uh, they now, a careful study has shown that the sea level rise that's already baked in from the melting of the Greenland ice cap uh, is inevitable, even if we stop fossil fuel burning today. And the global heating to date will cause an absolute minimum of sea level rise of about 10 and a half inches. They're not sure when. Certainly it'll be the next 100 or 150 years. It might be faster than that. And so uh, with it would with the continued carbon emissions and the melting of other ice caps and thermal expansion of the ocean, they're saying a multi-meter sea level rise appears likely, a multi-meter. And the they're saying this 10 and a half inches is a very conservative rock bottom minimum. And realistically, they expect a figure more than double that this century. So that would be 20 inches, and it's just from Greenland. Uh, it gives us a solid estimate of the inevitable sea level rise, but it doesn't give us a very good timeline yet. Uh, but most researchers say that most of this sea level rise would occur relatively soon. So I've been saying sell your beachfront property. I'm still saying that if any of us owns any. I, you own something near the water, don't you, Norman? Okay. And whether it's coming in 150 years or 100 years, it's coming. And if 2012 was a normal year, then the committed loss grows to 30 inches instead of 10 inches. So, and this, besides Greenland, the other things that are contributing to the rise that are not in this calculation include the melting of the glaciers in the Himalayas and the Alps and the West Arctic ice sheet that I'll have an article on next week that is staggering, actually. And then there is growing support in the literature for a multi-meter level of sea rise within the next 100 to 200 years. Uh, One part of it could be the collapse of the East Antarctic ice sheet, which would lead to a 50-meter sea rise, 150 feet from East Antarctic. They say that particular sea rise is something that could be averted with rapid climate action. So we have few meters that look like they're baked in, and then a massive amount 50 meters that looks like it's preventable. And, this baked in sea level change is bad news for at least 600 million people, about a tenth of the people on the planet that live in coastal zones less than 10 meters above uh, sea level. And it threatens, so far, about $1 trillion of global wealth. So it's not a cheap problem. So, what do you guys think? I can see Chad. What's that behind you today?
That is the rise in CO2 over the past 800,000 years. And actually, it's a little out of date. It shows this at 400. We're actually more like about 420 or even higher. So
That seems
I thought it would be appropriate based on the articles that you had.
that's right, and that seems kind of like a steep rise over that you have to the side of the chart. Now, what time
Yeah.
period did that occur in?
Well, this last part is only about 100 years, maybe. I'm not sure. I can't see the bottom of the chart.
Okay. Okay.
But yes, the last part is since the Industrial Revolution.
Okay. Okay. So
And
that's 200 years.
yeah,
Okay. That looks like a problem.
I would think so. I used to be, well, there's two kinds of climate change people. There's climate change deniers and climate change doomers. And frankly, I'm more of a climate change doomer. 10 years ago, I said it's too late.
Uh-huh.
It's too late to do anything about it. That's not to say that you can't mitigate, and that's what we're in right now is mitigation,
Right.
not changing it very much.
I also several years went to a place where I thought the best hope to do is somehow figure out how to make a soft landing now that we fell off the cliff.
Right.
I think that's the mitigation strategy. And we're making headway. I'm not a doomer because I still see enough of these nonlinear changes that are happening in critical areas that I think we're going to be able to stop that catastrophic rise, but it's still, we have so much to do that.
And a lot of it is politics, and a lot of it is, blue versus red conflicts. And I just don't see, well, you see the Senate is 50-50. I just don't see much getting done. Although recently, President Obama was able to get some things done anyway. Nothing like
what it was Biden now. Maybe that's Obama light.
Oh yeah, Obama light. I want to give him credit too.
Right, right.
There's another group too. It's the climate change optimists. And there's a lot of people that believe that climate change will actually benefit the world in general. So
that's right. Plants will grow faster, and
yeah,
and everything. And the fact that we have 50 meters of sea level rise and stuff like this just gives the surfers more opportunity.
Yeah, and you mentioned the red-blue controversy in the U.S. and the inability to act, but the U.S. in the last 5 years has reduced their CO2 emissions by 15%, where the rest of the world is continuing to burn more fossil fuel and increase ever more. And you'd think there's China, where they don't have any opposition. They can do whatever they want, yet they're continuing to burn more fuel all the time.
They're also the biggest investments in the world in renewables is going on in China. And I think China is scheduled in the next year or two to triple their photovoltaic. So they are also investing massively. Now, one of the things about China in the near term is China still is engaging in COVID shutdowns, and these COVID shutdowns shut down their industrial production. So their coal use was increasing because they were trying to make up for the production they missed in the COVID, and they're back to COVID shutdowns across the country now. So maybe that'll mitigate a little bit. And as I say, China is spending more money than any place in the world now on renewables. So I think China is going to bend their curve. And when we look at their CO2 outputs 2 or 3 years down the road, we're going to see that what they're doing is making a difference for the world. So I'm one of those anti-doomers that you're talking about. I think I am, except I don't think it's going to be wonderful. One of the things I do think that we're going to find out around the US and in many places in the world 10 or 15 years out is we'll go to many of these cities and we'll be able to breathe, you know? So I think that'll be good. That's one of the reasons I think that China is so motivated to act because they're one of the places in the world where some of the cities are getting so polluted that it's unlivable, and the problem causes production problems.
But the reality is, all these developing nations want to lift themselves out of poverty, and they know that they need more energy to do it.
Right. And so it could be a good opportunity if we're paying attention to help them do that in ways that are more beneficial to the planet. Now, one of the things about uh, renewables, there are reports that I've been reading regularly about UK and Scotland, where their new offshore wind facilities, the electricity cost from them is 1/9 of the cost of the fossil fuel plants. So one of the things about renewables is that it's cheaper. And if you're a poor country, maybe that's an advantage.
It makes you wonder why the utility costs in the UK have more than doubled in the last 2 years.
Uh-huh. Well, it makes you wonder why the petroleum countries or petroleum producing companies have last year the highest profits ever. I wonder if that's a contribution to the curve. Anyway, it's our planet, and if you can keep it. Okay, the next story is in the area of electric cars. And one of the things that limits electric car sales is the cost of the vehicles. They're trying to produce them like mad, but the costs still are higher than the typical family can afford. A big contributor to those costs is the cost of the batteries. And they're trying to do a lot of things with the batteries to reduce the cost. But as long as it takes a long time to charge the batteries, then people feel like they need to have a lot of range for their vehicles. People are looking for 300 or 400 mile range, and a longer range means more batteries, and more batteries means a higher priced car. And so, uh, despite the growing popularity of EVs, consumers still hesitate to make the switch. And one reason is how long it takes to power up and charge the electric car. And these scientists report they've designed a super fast charging method that is tailored to the different kinds of EV batteries. And typically they can charge them to 90% in 10 minutes or less, uh, as compared to about 30 minutes for the other charging systems. And this faster charging is one of the keys to improving consumer confidence in EVs. And it also will lower the cost of EVs, I believe, since uh, less range is needed if it's easier and faster to charge them. So, what they have done is to tailor charging protocols in a way that optimizes speed while avoiding damage for the many different kinds of battery designs that are currently in use. This was done by the Idaho Natural Laboratory, and they use machine learning techniques that incorporate charging data to create unique charging profiles. And so they train their machine learning analysis to predict lifetimes and the different ways that different designs would eventually fail, and then fed that data back into the analysis to identify and optimize new charging protocols that they then tested on real batteries. And they say we've significantly increased the amount of energy that can go into a battery cell in a short amount of time. And again, they say we're seeing batteries charged over 90% in 10 minutes without lithium plating or cathode cracking, which are two of the main problems. And the 10 minutes compare to current methods, which at best can get an EV to a full charge in about half an hour. They plan to use what they're learning to develop better methods and help design new lithium ion batteries that are optimized to undergo fast charging. And they say their ultimate goal is for EVs to be able to tell charging stations how to power up their specific batteries quickly and safely. So to me, it seems like uh, the charging systems of the future may end up having feedback from the battery system to the charger that'll help it do a better job. And again, this recharge speed, I believe, is a big deal. If for most city people who use their car in the city, if they were able to have a 150-mile range of batteries that they could charge quickly when they were out, then that's all you need for normal life. And that's going to cut the cost of these cars pretty dramatically. That's also going to reduce the amount of lithium and rare metals that are needed to produce the batteries. And it's things like this that make me encouraged about the kind of changes that are possible with this new technology. This you see, if you look closely, all of these steps, like you saw in the semiconductor business, the increasing capacity by a factor of 2 every 2 years was not accidental. It was just considerable money being continued to be poured into uh, process and research about how to be able to do it better. And it's been a significant ongoing process. And I think we're going to see the same thing with batteries and with renewable energy in general. And that's one of the reasons why I'm one of these. I don't believe in the worst of the doom scenarios because I think we're doing some things that are going in the right direction. I don't know if it'll be fast enough, but the next 10 years are going to make a big difference in the world, I believe.
Consumer Reports has a good section on now about plug-in hybrid cars, and
Ah,
the average American puts less than 40 miles a day on his car, and these plug-in hybrids have an electric-only range of about 40 miles.
okay, with that sound,
And
yes.
and the idea being that if you drive less than 40 miles a day, you never need to buy gasoline, but you don't have that range anxiety that an
Right.
electric only car has.
Right. And I have a friend who has one of those and has had it for several years. And every time we talk about the subject, he's enthusiastic about what a good choice he's had. He has a problem now, though, is he's had it long enough that he's thinking about replacing it. And, the used EVs are not very available. Even used hybrids are not very available.
Does he want to buy a used one or a new one?
Oh, I think for cost, he wants to buy a used one, but
Oh.
what he bought,
Another thing that was interesting is recently in California, they've had real electricity shortages, and they've commented there that if every gasoline vehicle in California was an electric vehicle, they would need an additional 30% of generating capacity to charge the batteries in these electric cars. And they've got no idea where this additional generating capacity is going to come from
yeah,
because they can't, you'd think if solar power was that cheap and great, they'd just put in enough solar panels. But
but the what we see in the UK is the really cheapest form is the off offshore wind, and that's something California is late in getting started with. They are starting it now on a fairly big scale, and that is not in any of the stuff that I'm hearing about anyway. I know California is having severe problems now because it's hot and people turn on their air conditioners and they don't have heat pumps and they burn a lot of energy. Now, one thing
another,
California is doing that's a small thing is they have started a major project putting solar panels on top of their canals, which are used as a part of their massive water system to steal all Northern California's water and ship it to LA. And the solar panels give more space to generate electricity. They also reduce the evaporation from the canals. And since California doesn't have enough water or enough electricity, it's an approach that gives them two for one. Now, one of the
Absolutely.
other problems with solar that is a non trivial problem is solar takes more ground space than these petrochemical plants or nuclear plants. And so there are ways in which the need for more solar uh, interferes with the need for more food. So that's also a kind of trade off that we're going to be hearing more about in the next few years.
Okay, let
it's
me
it,
tell you about some real life experience. I have a Tesla, Uh, the range is 270 miles. Now, last week I wasn't here because I took a trip to South Lake Tahoe. South Lake Tahoe is 500 miles away from here. And I just took 500 and divided that by 250. I need to stop one time, right? Wrong. Because that range is not, is kind of an absolute range. And if you went 270, you'd be out of electricity. Your car would stop. But, and then also what you don't realize is that how you drive makes a difference. If you got a heavy foot, you're going to use up that battery power much more quickly than if you just let it go at a steady 60, 65 miles an hour. In fact, on the way up there, we were getting, I was going to go halfway, and there was a station, a charging station about halfway. And but a sign went up in my monitor. The Teslas have a big screen that you look at all the time. Everything's automated. You want to open the glove compartment, you got to find a button to do that. So a notice comes up on the monitor that if I exceeded 74 miles an hour, I would not make my destination that I plan to make, because once you get going too fast, it just uses up too much battery. Now, this news of a faster charging is really, really good news for me. I charge it by plugging into a 110 socket.
Oh, God.
And I know. That charges at the rate of 3 miles per hour. Now, but if you're not going anywhere,
right, that's fine.
But overnight, that's about 30 miles. But it's very slow, and it's just always there. And there's peak and off-peak times that you need to utilize in California.
What would it be like if you had a 220 charger?
I have an electrician coming over today at 4:30 our time. Okay. He's going to install one, but that'll increase it to 30 miles per hour, charging 30 miles per hour. So but that's good, because overnight then I can
get a
full charge overnight, which is good.
How long does it take to charge your battery, Norman?
I charge at 220, but I charge at 5 or 6 amps. So, overnight, I get quite a bit of mileage.
Okay.
Because I do charge at night, it draws the voltage down if I use a higher charge rate, and then the solar panels aren't as effective.
Right, of course.
Charge at night.
Oh yeah. So the one that I'm having installed is a 30 amp charger, and the Tesla sells really pretty cheaply. But anyway, I'd stopped 3 times going up, had stopped twice coming back.
You got better mileage going downhill.
Well, I just I judged it more effectively and didn't have such a heavy foot. But it takes, another thing about how long it takes, if you're on the road, going places, you're not going to charge from 0 to 270 miles. You're going to probably stop and charge about 150 miles. And so 150 miles is going to take you about 20 minutes.
Okay. And, do they usually have restaurants, the charging places?
Well, you plan it around that there needs to be a pub or a restaurant. So you have lunch. Hopefully they have bathrooms. So you time it around that. But it's It's like a man going up was a mandatory 3 stop, 20 minutes at least, 20 minutes to a half hour stop. So that adds a lot of time to your trip.
Right. And so if you could cut the charging time to a third, then that sure makes it easier.
Right. You may not leave your car, or you get out of your car and you wash your windows and stuff like
Uh-huh.
that.
And go to the bathroom and
If there's a bathroom around.
Well, in a Tesla, also you can be watching Netflix or Prime or whatever while it's
ah,
charging.
okay, okay,
you
that's
can,
right. Or
you
playing
can
games.
you can if you pay for it.
Well, it
Yeah.
may be different in Mexico because here we don't have a surcharge.
We have to pay about $10 a month for for internet on the Tesla thing. You really don't need it.
But it's nice when you're waiting to charge.
Yeah, but while you're inside waiting to charge and it's 109 degrees outside, which happened,
Uh-huh.
you're using battery power while you're trying to charge, and so it
Right.
can slow it down.
Yep. Anyway, interesting discussion, and the fact that two of the people on the call today have real life experiences, I think adds a lot to it.
Well, it's interesting too that a lot of the focus is on electricity, but in the US right now, the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory have their flow charts that you can look at and the latest one is 2021 of US energy consumption, and it's about 97 quads total consumption. And the interesting thing is only about 15% of that winds up as usable electricity. About 30% of it is used to generate electricity of the energy, but half of it is rejected as waste heat. But the overall 97 quads of energy demand that's used, about 60% or more is rejected as waste heat. And it's crazy to think that so much energy is used or consumed, but then discarded as waste heat.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is one of the areas where they also are doing a lot of research and in terms of using that waste heat to be able to generate electricity. And there are some uh, solid state systems that they have developed and tested that are not yet put into production that are more efficient than the typical steam power generating engine. And this turns the waste heat into additional power. So, that is one of the things they actually have identified as an issue, and they're figuring out things to do something about. Anyway, that's a good point. And here you didn't even talk about all the transmission losses and all of this other stuff, which are another thing that lose a big chunk of the power.
Yeah, perhaps 10% of the
Right,
electricity generated is lost in transmission. The
right.
other unfortunate,
In Mexico, it's 30%.
Oh God, I didn't realize that.
That's what CFE reports, that they lose 30% in the high tension transmission.
And, I spent years in the high tech power supply business. And there, if the power supply only lost 30% of its power in heat, then we thought we were doing a good job. And those are the things that are in front of every computer that's used on the planet.
it's
And
a,
the heat from the power supplies is a big issue for aircraft.
Oh, I bet. And
Uh,
also, I had a
at
friend who
higher
designed them.
altitudes, at higher altitudes, it's harder to get rid of the heat.
Yes, I have a friend who was designing part of the power system for the Voyager. And if you think aircraft have trouble getting rid of heat, imagine what it's like in space.
The other thing that's unfortunate is that more effort isn't being put into these small nuclear
Yes, yes.
facilities.
Some of these are good. I guess we'll see a test of those when Bill Gates gets his facility in that's replacing the steam powered system. So that'll be one of the places where there's a highly visible test going, and that's supposed to be new tech nuclear that doesn't have nearly a severe waste problem. And that has a faster timeline than fusion. I think fusion is going to be coming, but it's going to be it'll be a decade before enough is deployed to make any kind of an impact. And we will have made enough headway on renewables that my vision for fusion is you use fusion to power these various carbon capture things, which need energy. They use the energy to pull the carbon out of the air, and fusion will be a good way to do that, I guess. Anyway, we're in the middle of the situation where there are so many simultaneous changes happening that most people really can't get their head around it because we have a series of nonlinear changes that we are in the early stages of in most of them. And the mind can't get around these nonlinear changes because they're not what we experience in our everyday life. I know I did a lot of forecasting in my professional life. And when you're forecasting, you tend to think that the future is going to be like the past. And that's not a nonlinear function. Anyway, on to the universe. Now we'll go from our small problems to the big problems. And uh, the web, as I say, just a few weeks from when they turned it on, they're finding the furthest, oldest galaxies. And, you know, part of the web's mission is to investigate the uh, beginning of this version of the universe in the early universe. And like all telescopes, it's a time machine. Light travels 300,000 kilometers per second. So when you're looking back a few uh, millions or billions of years, you're looking back a long way in time. And now Webb has detected a number of galaxies. These are galaxies, not stars, where the light has taken 13.5 billion years to get to Earth. And we think that the universe itself is 13.8 billion years old. So these are galaxies that were formed in the first 300 million years. We're getting the light from them. It takes a galaxy about 100 million years, excuse me, I keep losing a few decimal places, to form. So these are galaxies that started to form 200 million years after the Big Bang from stars that had to be there before that. And this doesn't fit the timeline of the Big Bang causing this singularity where the universe just sprouted from nothing to everything. And they're having trouble reconciling what they are seeing now with the theory of the Big Bang. And Daryl might be able to tell us what it means if the idea of the Big Bang was wrong. What do you think, Daryl?
Well, certainly right now, all the information we're getting from the web is throwing a wrench into the Big Bang theory presently, just because those numbers don't add up
Uh-huh.
against the theory. So there's a bunch of astrophysicists right now that are out there crunching the numbers, scratching their heads, and I suspect within the next year there'll probably be Big Bang Theory 2 coming out because it just doesn't add up to what the theory says these days.
And this is one of the things I love about science, where you can have this well-established, well-studied idea, and then all of a sudden you start to find out something new that doesn't fit anymore.
Right, right. I mean, the Big Bang Theory was developed around 1927, I believe.
Okay.
And since then, there's been nothing uh, for anyone to use to cause it to be a wrong theory or be
Uh-huh.
wrong. So now this is the first time ever there's evidence that it could be wrong.
Uh-huh. And, it's hard for me to separate this kind of astronomy from physics,
Yeah,
because,
yeah. I mean, there's a specific brand of physics, astrophysics, and then there's quantum physics. Um, but astrophysics is it's turned their heads the last couple of weeks.
uh-huh. So again, my mother used to say the grandest answer to he who asked the grandest question. And, having these problems where stuff doesn't fit makes you ask more questions.
Yep, it opens up your mind even more.
Uh-huh. But I bet some of these astrophysicists have not been sleeping well.
That's correct. I mean, when you find these well-formed galaxies, way earlier than what Big Bang says they could even be there,
Yes.
it's just amazing. It's amazing.
Yes. So that's one of the reasons I'm really glad that you're on these calls showing us little pieces of the universe each time.
Right. I'm the oldest I've ever took a photo is 10 billion years. I got one photo of a neutron star 10 billion years old. Of course,
Okay.
it's a little red dot you can barely see with a pencil tip.
Uh-huh. I wonder
But
what that would look like from the web.
yeah, I'd love to see that one.
Uh-huh.
It's interesting too that if you agree that the Big Bang is the origin, all the material or half the material that expanded away from the Big Bang would never emit light that would reach us because it's going the other direction
That's
and
right.
getting farther away. So we'll never see half the material that originated from the Big Bang.
Right. And
That's
that's if we're an expanding universe. If we're not
Yeah.
expanding and we're contracting, then maybe eventually we'll see it. I don't know.
that's right. We'll have the big crunch.
Yes, exactly. Well said.
We'll,
Anyway,
we'll
I still remember the famous story about the person who listened to an astronomer talking about the sun and saying, what in a what is it, a billion years or a half 500 million years, the sun is gonna make the earth uninhabitable. And after he heard the presentation, he was asking questions, and uh, the scientist reiterated it's going to be 500 million years. And he said, oh, that's a big relief. I thought you said 50 million years.
Right.
Anyway,
Well,
now
the
go
other
ahead,
interesting
please.
the other interesting thing about these neutron stars that Daryl mentions is that they will emit more energy in a few minutes than the sun has emitted in its entire 4 billion year existence.
Wow.
Yep.
It's just beyond imagining the amounts of energy that are released in a neutron star.
And, this is why I think that this kind of astronomy is physics work, because the physicists use this to figure out what in the world can possibly, get these levels of energy.
Right. And each neutron star out there has its own signature pulse. And so they're saying that in future star travel, if we ever get there, these neutron stars will be our GPS system through the stars because
Ah, okay.
you
Okay.
can know your place based upon these neutron stars because of the pulse signals.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
I'm a sci-fi reader. I haven't read that. That hasn't gotten into the sci-fi I've read. I guess I read old stuff.
Well, Asimov had it in one of his books a while back, but
Okay, well,
yeah.
I don't recall it for me. Anyway, now to go on with our biology story, this is, I think, pretty exciting. And let me start it off with a picture. Uh, what we see here is scientists have been able to grow synthetic embryos with a brain, which is over here or over here, and a beating heart over here, without eggs or sperm. And uh, what scientists from the University of Cambridge have created model embryos from mouse stem cells that form a brain, a beating heart, and the foundation for all the other organs in the body. And uh, the team of researchers developed this embryo model without eggs or sperm. They use stem cells, which can develop into almost any kind of cell. And uh, by guiding these three types of stem cells that they use that are found in early mammalian development, to the point where they start interacting, then the researchers were able to mimic natural processes in the lab. And the key is they were able to get these stem cells to interact with each other by inducing the expression of particular sets of genes and establishing the right kind of environment that is needed for these interaction between these different growing sets of cells. And the stem cells self-organize into structures that progress through the successive development stages until they had beating hearts, the foundation of an egg, and they also had a yolk sac where the embryo develops and gets its nutrients. And this study was the result of more than a decade of research. So it's a pretty major work. And the key thing that they have found out is this, what they call a dialogue, the interaction between the tissues that'll form the embryo and the tissues that will connect the embryo to the mother, which are all necessary for the healthy development of a human embryo. And it turns out that many pregnancies fail at just this point when these three types of stem cells begin to send mechanical and chemical signals to each other. And so many pregnancies fail around this time before most women even realize they are pregnant. And this stem cell embryo model is important because it gives us accessibility to the developing structure at a stage that's normally hidden for us due to the fact that it's a tiny embryo in the mother's womb. And the accessibility then allows the scientists to manipulate genes and understand their development roles in a model experimental model. And this period of human life is mysterious, and they've been able to look at the dialogue that has to happen between these different kinds of stem cells at that time, and they now know how it occurs and how it can go wrong. And one of the ways that this work will end up showing up if it turns out to be successful with human stem cells is this can be a way that they can use to guide development of synthetic organs for patients awaiting transplants. So I believe this is an enormous deal for biological science. And here we come, babies without men.
Did they mention when this could actually be viable, like to grow an organ? I'm curious what timeline we're talking about.
Well, it took them 10 years to get from nothing to be able to figure out how to grow something.
Okay, all right.
And I think the work that they have done is already an enormous chunk of the work because once you can get them to grow something, you're on your way to getting them to grow something else.
Right.
And they said already that what they saw had the basics for the other organs. So they just have to figure out how to develop the next piece. And again, I'm so impressed by, this scientist. This is started by some person who has this desire, and I believe was told in grad school working on her PhD, don't investigate that. You'll never get anywhere. You should do something you can solve. But
Right.
she was not satisfied with that.
True. Well, I'm glad she wasn't.
Me too. Me too. And, these are the people we need to be intellectually unsatisfied, so they just keep driving. It takes something crazy for most people to be able to uh, devote your life to some problem that you can't solve.
Yeah.
Surprised the article didn't delve more into the ethical problems involved.
Well, that's another one. We have to get the philosophers involved. And we know when we get the philosophers involved, they will never have an answer. Just look at the questions of free will versus determinism. They've been arguing about that for at least 2,000 years.
At least. I belong to another group that we still argue about it.
Okay, of course.
But stem cell research has been controversial for the last 10, 15 years or longer.
Right. Well, since Bush put a stop to it in the beginning of this century.
Yeah.
Well, it's human stem cells that they're controversial. This woman was using mice stem cells, I think.
Right.
Well, I don't know if that's any different. But...
Well, I'm sure the philosophers would say they would be able to tell us. Right, Chad?
Right.
So one of the ethical questions that I continue to encounter is what are the ethics with sentient life forms? And associated with that question is, what are sentient life forms anyway?
God didn't intend for us to do this kind of stuff.
That's right. You know, if a chicken can recognize themselves in a mirror, is it okay to eat them?
I know. There's a lot of questions involved.
Uh-huh. So that's what I like about this one. This is still growing things from stem cells. You don't need a whole chicken.
I just finished a book called The Overstory, and it's a very radical book about this kind of thing. Uh, the, the essence of the book is claims that trees have consciousness. Mm-hmm. And so, and not, it goes from there to trees, the plants, that we all have consciousness. It's just different than what we have.
Right, right.
But, there's a lot of ethical questions involved.
Well, the kind of spiritual path that I've been following for the last 30 years sees consciousness as part of the fundamental nature of the universe.
Right. There's a name for that in philosophy. I think it's called psychopanology.
I think that's close to it. Yes.
Yeah, something like that. I gave a presentation on that to our group and was not exactly laughed out of the room, but they thought it was pretty humorous anyway.
Uh-huh. Well, imagine what it would be like if you thought this was the way things are for 30 years and tried to tell other people. And I don't even have the advantage of fancy philosophical names. And so basically, most people that I talk to about it think that I'm crazy, and maybe I am, but it's been good for me. Anyway, now
I just want to say that I'm here, but I'm eating. So I'm here though.
Okay, well that's good. It looks good what we're having.
This is called Mary Kay's breakfast sandwich. It's pepper jack, cheese, bacon, and egg. And
okay.
It's named after my sister-in-law. So.
All right. A sister-in-law sandwich.
Tell you one more time.
Okay, that looks good.
But in California, it's almost 1:00, so and I haven't had lunch yet.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Enjoy. You can eat in front of us. We don't care. Okay, the next story is about what I've tried to avoid my whole life, which is small talk. And the British are mocked for their weather-related small talk, but it turns out exchanging idle pleasantries can leave a lasting impression and affect future social interactions. So scientists did a study about this. You know, these scientists study lots of things. And what they found is just 4 minutes of this small talk can, with a person that you don't know, can give away many aspects of our personality, like whether we're introverted or extroverted, and they can influence future social interactions. And the research suggests small talk is an important way to learn about the personality of others. And to do this, they took a study with more than 300 participants and they divided them into two groups. You got to make two groups if you're going to study anything. And each participant completed a personality and an IQ test. And then within the two groups, half of them were paired up with and engaged in a 4-minute conversation by text, and the other half had no contact with their partner. And then what they found is those who chatted scored more highly on predicting their partner's IQ and the answers they made to their personality tests. And so they see even in a few minutes, we start to form a mental model of the person we're talking with, whether they're extroverted or introverted, upbeat or downbeat, cooperative or uncooperative. And these impressions won't be perfect, but they'll be useful. And so to test this, they had the participants meet and played a game with their conversational partner or with this stranger if they were in the no contact group. They gave each participant 20 pounds and asked them to contribute to a communal pot shared with their partner. This is a cognitive experiment called the public goods game. And the team that had chatted with their partner were more likely to predict correctly the partner's contribution to the pot. And those who had chatted beforehand contributed 30% more and ended up having a bigger reward. And so those who engaged in small talk with their partner had a better understanding of the partner's personality and were better at predicting the character traits, which in turn helped them predict how they would behave. So people find small talk hard because it can feel like it's never going to end. But if you see it as a gateway and ask follow-up questions, it can help you relate people. If you're going to talk about the weather, think of ways to expand beyond that, and people are more willing to share if you show your care. So the advice of the author of the article says, be genuinely curious. So maybe small talk isn't so small after all. I personally always hated it. But now maybe it's the key to the universe.
It's not my cup of tea.
Me neither. You'd rather talk about the universe and,
Absolutely.
you know.
Just the facts, man.
Uh-huh. Again, I share that same.
Well, we've all evolved to advance our own self-interest at the expense of other people and those around us. And probably small talk is just one of many tactics or strategies for better understanding your environment and seeing where you can advance your own self-interest at the expense of others.
Well, one thing about what you say that is particular about our Homo sapiens species is we actually are the species on the planet that is the best at a wide range of cooperation. And so while we are advancing our own interests, we have made enormous headway because we are able to cooperate. The stored learning of humanity is an example of that cooperation. I think the fact that we've done as well as we can with a smaller brain than the Neanderthals is because of that cooperation, and we're able, because of the cooperation, to keep some of our total learning as a part of our society and not just in our individual brain. So the reason our brain can be smaller than the Neanderthals is we're better at cooperating.
Yeah, and it's language that facilitates that cooperation. And
Yes.
that's really what separates us more than any other thing from other animals.
Mm-hmm. Except they don't know about dolphins. Dolphins for example, seem to recognize each other by name, which kind of points to language. As soon as you have symbolic references, seems like that's language.
The other thing is other animals get to know one another through small talk, but it's not verbal small talk. It's
I know
just
with walking a dog, I get to see
yeah,
that.
yeah.
I kid that dogs had social networks way before we did. And it also appears to me from walking dogs that some dogs must be poets or something like that, because their smell they leave seems to be particularly appealing. Okay, last up for today is a story for us old folks. What we have noticed ourselves is that bodies lose their vigor with the passing of the years. But it turns out in the emotional realm, older people seem to reign supreme. For the past 20 years, Susan Turk Charles, who's a psychologist at University of California, Irvine, has been monitoring the shifting moods and sense of satisfaction and the outbursts of anger and sadness in people of all ages. And she has a special interest in how we handle and experience emotions as we get older. And 20 years ago, she fell in love with the idea of studying a process related to aging that is not defined by a decline, unlike physical fitness or cognition, where you may see a slowing or decline. Emotional regulation and experience are often as good or better as we age. They found on average, older people have more satisfying social contacts and report higher emotional well being. Now, some neuroscientists believe that because we're processing information a little slower with age, that makes us think before we act instead of reacting quickly. We do see a decline with age in the overall mass of a brain's frontal lobe, and this is responsible for emotional regulation, complex reasoning, and speed of mental processing. But older adults often exhibit greater prefrontal cortex activity, which is a newer part of the brain than the cortex, and then younger adults. And they uh, see this particularly when they're processing emotions. They also find that older people have a positive bias, even without realizing that they're doing this. They say, don't sweat the small stuff. And older people more often let go of a situation they think is negative, especially dealing with friends and families. So they really are picking their battles better than younger people, unless they have cognitive decline, which causes them not to default towards this kind of positive bias. I think that's interesting. Does that mean my old friends who are grumpy and negative have more mental decline? I don't know. Uh, they also see the highest positive and lowest negative emotions are between the ages of 55 and 70. And then only after 75 do negative emotions start increasing again. I'm 78. I wonder if the negative emotions start to increase as you face, hey, the end is coming. Now, though it turns out even centenarians report an overall high level of emotional well-being. So even though there's a decline, as you get older, there's still these high levels of emotional well-being reported. And it turns out psychological well-being is consistently related to two things. One is lower level of the stress hormone cortisol, and two is better cardiovascular health. Now, this lower level of the stress hormone cortisol, by the way, is one result that they have found regularly in people who have an ongoing meditation process. And what I hope is the 35 years that I've been doing that may have contributed to my own sense of psychological well-being. According to this, it may. Now, emotional regulation improves with age, but if older people are in vulnerable situations with constant stressors, or if they're living in pain, you may not see these benefits because they have other things they have to deal with. And when they're talking about it, they're theorizing as you get older, you see that there's less time left and people start valuing emotional goals more. So older people tend to spend more time with family and friends and less time meeting brand new people who might be interesting. So make sure that you spend time cultivating your social ties and treasuring and prioritizing your close friends and family members. It's also important to find purpose and meaning in your daily life. And now there's an issue with this ongoing sense of satisfaction. You can be so comfortable that you no longer encounter any challenges, and you really need to stay engaged in cognitive challenges to keep the brain going. Here they studied about 2,500 people, and 10% of them report not experiencing even one stressor. They also, the good news is they reported being happier than the people who reported at least one stressor. The bad news is they performed worse on cognitive tests. So these 10% who didn't have any stress and were happy also had their brains rotting. So I'm not sure if that's as good as it is. The people who reported one stressor did a lot, or more stressors did better mentally. These people who are happy with no stressors also reported having received or given less help to others, and they spent more time, guess what, watching TV. So it's more evidence that watching TV may make you happy, but it rots your brain. The people who are reported being happiest might not be as high in cognitive functioning. And it may be because people who have no stressors are spending less time with other people. But people you know and love also challenge you and engage you in problem solving. Uh, it might be a trade off. Somebody might say, I want to be a volunteer. It gives me emotional meaning. I have a lot of purpose in life, but I'm also going to run into people that are just problems. And so they might avoid that situation while running into these problem people are the stressors that continue to keep your brain alive. The author says to achieve balance, people need to know themselves and make decisions that create dynamic lives where they're socially active and engaged in a way that makes them feel a sense of belonging and makes them feel needed. They need activities that are challenging to them, where they learn new information and have to remember this information. Now, in these sessions, we give a lot of new information. I don't make you feed it back. Maybe I should give a little test at the end, so you have to remember it. So, to me, this is actually a real encouraging article, and it fits with my own experience of getting older. And, these years have been, I feel like, the happiest years of my life, also among the most kind of intellectually productive years of my life. And I'm glad. How about you guys?
Well, it's interesting that they admit that the study mainly canvassed weird people, the successful Western people
Yes,
who had already made good. And it
right.
would be interesting to see if they interviewed practicing Asian Buddhists, because
Mhm.
Buddhists are supposed to be less competitive and have a more realistic worldview and be more accepting of the passage of time and life and death and all these things. So it'd be interesting to see if Buddhists are any emotionally more
Mhm.
satisfied than weird people.
Right. I think, your point, generalized from your point, this is still done within a very narrow cultural set. And, what's it like for other people? There are lots of other cultural sets. And certainly what they've seen with this aging research is there are places where there are cultures where people lived longer ages and stuff like that. So there's this incredible range of behaviors and effects of those behaviors. And I think a study like this is just something that starts to open a new way of looking. And certainly, from what they say, one of the characteristics of Buddhists is an ongoing meditation practice, and this ongoing meditation practice reduces the basic physiological stressor of cortisol, and that has fairly significant physiological and mental effects. Okay, well, we had another good session. It's good to see you guys and hope to see you next week. And, keep reading and thinking. And as we're doing here, the interaction that we have with each other feeds all these positive processes that we hear about in the last article. So I think we are doing the things that we need to do to take deep care of ourselves. And we should feel good about that. So see you
Richard,
next week.
thank you so much.
Okay. See you next week,
See
friends.
you next week.
See you.